Welcome. Thank you for joining us on today's webinar hosted by the National Center for Pyramid Model Innovations. My name is Victor Trinidad with NCPMI. This webinar is part of the Digging into Data webinar series. Today's topic is data decision-making using the BIRS, with today's presenters, Megan von der Emps and Myrna Begia.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. Today, we're going to go through data decision-making using the Behavior Incident Report System. We'll go through the decision-making process using the charts and tables in the BIRS Excel. Throughout the presentation, we'll reference the BIRS Database Decision-Making Guide so that you'll be able to go through the process with your own data. And finally, we'll conclude by putting it all together and, if time permits, answering your questions. As Victor mentioned, there is a Q&A button down at the bottom. We encourage you to ask your questions, and we'll do our best to answer them throughout the presentation. And if there's time at the end, for those that we don't answer, we will address those as well. So setting the stage for this webinar. So this webinar is part of the Digging into Data webinar series that builds up from a basic introduction to the BIRS to its use in programs. So today's webinar will focus on decision-making using the BIRS. So if you aren't using the BIR system or you don't know what the BIR system is, you'll still be able to enjoy today's webinar, but we do encourage you to go back to webinars 1, 2, and 3 to kind of get more information and build that foundation so that you can build background knowledge about the system and what it can do. So the BIR Excel is a powerful tool, and the BIR itself is a powerful tool. So as you might know, the BIR is a system for collecting and analyzing behavior incidents in early childhood settings. The system can provide your program with data that guides decisions related to behavior prevention and response. It will help you to identify and address concerns related to discipline responses. It will summarize data for challenging behavior, providing you with the who, when, where of behavior incidents and how adults respond. But most importantly, it will provide you with data to identify children and teachers in need of support.
All right, thanks for that introduction, Myrna. So today we are really focused on, as Myrna said, making sure that we're providing the most support when we are using behavior incident data. So we are going to be referencing a resource, the Behavior Incident Report System Database Decision-Making Guide. We're going to be referencing this throughout the webinar. This is a resource that is available when you access all of the Behavior Incident Report tools. This is a resource that was developed to support leadership teams to feel confident and comfortable in their ability to fully use the BIRS and engage in that database decision-making process. The more familiar you are with this guide, so if you haven't looked at it, we highly recommend it to help you in the process of understanding and using data around the behavior incident report system. But the more you use this resource, the more comfortable you will be when sharing information with leadership teams looking at behavior incident report data. So as we go through today's webinar, we might be referencing pages in this guide. This is just to help you if you have the guide with you, or if it's something you want to go back and access at a later time. You'll see in the right-hand corner of your slides, it says guide, and on future slides, it's going to have a page number. That's just a little helpful resource for you to know that there is additional information in the guide to assist you in this database decision-making process. So let's look at this guide a little more, because this kind of sets the stage for how the rest of our webinar, and Myrna kind of explained our agenda, but we're going to follow this guide in its outline and the process for reviewing data. So the guide has information on look, think, act, which is one way that we can engage in the database decision-making cycle. There's information about how to prepare for monthly leadership team meetings, and information about how to conduct program level data analysis, classroom level, and then individual child analysis, as well as information on the quarterly equity data review, which for those of you who are interested will be explained in depth in one of our future Digging Deeper webinar series around the BIR. So one of the most frequent feedback we receive from leadership team members when they're using the BIR. So they're completing BIR forms, they're entering the data into the Excel spreadsheet, but then it comes time to review the data and they feel a little lost. We often hear, we don't know what to bring to the meeting or what to prepare ahead of time. And we hear things like, if I just know what to prepare or what to bring to a meeting, I'll bring it. Just tell me what to do to help me prepare for these kind of ongoing data review where we're looking at behavior incident report data. So part of that decision-making guide that we just looked at really was to help leadership teams who are implementing pyramid model navigate the use of BIR data and knowing how to prepare for monthly meetings, to know what to bring to monthly meetings, and how to interpret graphs and summaries, and to successfully engage in that database decision-making using the BIR data. By assisting teams in this process, they can have the capacity to make decisions at the program level, the classroom level, and then that individual child level. So as we go through the webinar today, you are gonna hear us discuss these terms: look, think, and act. And as Myrna said, some of this information has been covered in our previous BIR webinar series, but within the pyramid model, when we are engaging in the database decision-making cycle around data tools, we have kind of streamlined this process in that we can look at BIR data, or we can look at data, we can think deeply about the data and ask questions and really try to understand what the data might be indicating. And then we can make really good decisions and program actions around use of that BIR data. So as we go through today's webinar, we'll be really using that look and think process to kind of outline how this database decision-making process works around this ongoing data analysis. One of the ways to build program capacity in the database decision-making process is by making sure leadership teams have filled the role of a data coordinator. So if you're interested in the additional information about the data coordinator, that is information that also can be found within that database decision-making guide. So the data coordinator is a member of the leadership team, and they guide the discussion around BIR data and assist the team in making interpretations and helping the team kind of stay on track with that team process and the use of data. So the data coordinator does not have to know all of the questions or have all of the answers, but they should be familiar with the common questions and the processes that go on with monthly data review. So the data coordinator may review BIR data and prepare data summaries before the meeting so that when the leadership team is together, they can focus on kind of really working on action planning during that meeting process. Within the database decision-making guide, one tool that was included was this data coordinator monthly BIR data review summary. And that is a mouthful, and I have to read it out loud when I'm describing this. And we often just call it the worksheet around BIR. So if you hear me say, you might write this down on your worksheet. This is a tool in which, as you're preparing for data meetings, a way that you can jot down information as you're reviewing data ahead of time. This process, the preparation for data, is really important because it allows, time is so we have such a limited time during ongoing meetings when you're implementing the pyramid model and you have your monthly leadership team meetings. Time to review data might be a very brief part of the overall agenda. By having a summary or a place where all the important information is kind of shared ahead of time or is written down, this will be really helpful. So this worksheet can be used as needed, so we can complete only what you need. You might prepare for the meeting and just share important program data, or maybe there's just classroom data updates. So this is a resource that's included in that larger database decision-making guide. And you'll hear us kind of reference this through the webinar, that maybe this is something you would write down, or you might write your precision statement on the bottom of that review summary worksheet. So we've talked a little bit about how a data coordinator can assist teams in really preparing for meetings and kind of understanding the information that needs to happen ahead of time. But one of the other questions we hear from those using the behavior incident report is, where do I start in the Excel spreadsheet? So if you are familiar or you've used the behavior incident report and the Excel spreadsheet, as Myrna said, it's a very powerful tool. It's also one that can feel a little complex, and that there's many tabs within that Excel spreadsheet. So there's lots of places you can go within that spreadsheet to get information. So one of the places we recommend where teams start is the program summary tab. So we have a teams look here first. So the data coordinator may start here as a way to prepare for a leadership team meeting. Remember, looking at data is the first step in that database decision-making process. So when preparing for the monthly meeting, begin here. And this one tab contains all of these charts and data and graphs. So I'm not going to read through this long list, but I want you just to glance at it and to think that is a lot of information, kind of really critical information that can be gained in just one place. So you don't have to keep switching tabs. All of this information is found on that summary tab. So it's again, we're trying to make, what can we do to help programs know where to start and then where to go next. So this is the place to start. The reason we start here, we want to give you a little rationale, so you just don't take us at face value that we're kind of giving you some rationale about why you would start here, is that it's a great place not only to get a wealth of information, but to easily assess a visual change at the program level, kind of at a glance. So as you maybe see changes, and you might see changes in a response to an action plan. So we're going to have a couple sample graphs. So if you were to try something new in a program, say add activities on the playground, would you see a decrease in behavior incident reports related to those program actions? The program summary might, you could easily go here and see a visual change. You can also see trends over time. So are we reducing the number or the average number of BIRs per month? You can also easily access alerting data, such as an increase in number of children identified with BIRs, or an increase in the average number of BIRs per child. So you could go to the program summary tab and easily see if there were any increases or significant decreases. In addition, you can also see if there are any responses to behavior by teachers or administrators that might be less desirable or inappropriate, such as physical hold restraint, a temporary removal from classroom. So it's a place where you can go to easily see this kind of alerting data. So here are a few examples of graphs that you would find within that program summary tab. So here is a program summary, and what we see from this program, if you were to quickly glance at this particular graph, you would notice that kind of steady increase in the number of BIRs per day, or the number of BIRs for this program. But what if this program had tried something new? So they had put in place some program actions. So they tried something new in the month of January in hopes of maybe reducing challenging behavior in the program. This would be a really great place to start to say, perhaps something isn't working, or it's not working the way we intended. And it would be information that the leadership team could easily view and could have really good discussions about what the data are indicating that kind of upward trend and what they might need to do differently. So we can also look at other graphs to see those same trends. So here is an example of a graph from the program summary, the average number of incidents per day. So if it was that same program and they're trying something new and their goal would be to maybe continue decreasing the average number of incidents per day, but instead they have an increase. Again, just a nice way to easily visually assess those trends within a program. So once you've reviewed that program summary page, that's kind of that first step, you get that at a glance, what is happening. The next step to prepare for a monthly meeting is to review the big questions to answer. So there you can see on the bottom of the slide, this is found in page 11. So if you do have access to that, the Behavior Incident Report Database Decision-Making Guide, or if it's something you want to look at in the future, you can find this table within that guide on page 11. So these big questions to answer really help kind of gain that critical information that are really helpful for decision making. So this information includes the frequency of behavior incidents. So that's that what is happening, the frequency in which problems occur in different locations. So where is challenging behavior occurring? The frequency in which problems occur during different activities or routines of the preschool day or the early childhood environment. So that's that when. And the frequency in which problems are reported for different children or groups of children. So kind of the who. Other useful information includes possible motivation, others involved in staff or administrative response. So by answering these questions, and we're going to go through this together on the webinar, leadership teams can improve the quality of action planning. Database decision-making is facilitated when there's a focus, well-defined need is established. And that's by reviewing these questions, you really get kind of what is the need, what is the data indicating, and how can we make really good actions based on those data summaries. So answering the big questions helps you develop summary statements that guide the leadership team in this data decision-making process. So remember, we can use that look, think, act process to identify the number of incidents per month and then drill down to get that information. So we can look at information at the program level, at the classroom level, and at the child level. You can engage in the monthly data review to further drill down, to look at those variables that will help you identify very specific actions. So we kind of reviewed some of those when we're answering those big questions. We're looking at things like problem behavior. Where is the activity? Why is this challenging behavior occurring? Or what's the perceived motivation? And what might be the teacher or the adult response to that challenging behavior? And then we're also looking at this with our kind of keeping our eye on what our equity data is indicating and reviewing our equity data on a quarterly basis. So we will have an upcoming webinar that is going to kind of unpack and review that equity, the quarterly equity review that also can be done using behavior incident data. So we've done a little overview of the data review process. And so we're going to use that kind of process to actually look at program data. And that's where we're going to start, is at a program level. So for the next set of information, we are going to be looking at program data for a particular month. So if you can kind of use your imagination that you have a program who has BIR data through the month of April, and that's the month that we're going to focus on. If you have not had a chance to have access to BIR data, or you haven't had a full kind of program year of using the behavior incident report, this will kind of get you a little preview of that process. So we're going to review the data associated with each graph as we would prepare for a monthly data review. So we're going to be preparing and thinking about what we would need to do a monthly kind of review for this program. So it's the month of April. So to gather monthly data, it's really important. This is like we have some important messages here. If you go back and you're looking in your own Excel spreadsheet and you're ready to kind of review this process, one important message is that you have to filter the data. And that's something that we've talked about in our previous BIR webinars, but we want to kind of go through it today. That we said to start at the program summary. Those graphs are cumulative. They kind of give you that at a glance what's happening in the program, but they cannot provide you monthly data. So you can't compare what's happening in the month of April to what happened during the month in October when you're looking at that program data. You have to go beyond that program summary tab into the other tabs within the Excel spreadsheet. So the tabs within the spreadsheet have the ability to filter by month. So we are going to walk through this. And so we are going to go into that first, kind of answer that first question. So as we go through these, you're going to hear me say these questions aloud. I'm answering those big questions. So the first thing we want to know is, who are the children that are experiencing challenging behavior? So we start at the monthly BIRs by child ID, and we're filtering by the month of April. So we can see, I'm just doing quick visual analysis, that we have 17 counted for you, so you don't have to count. We have 17 children who were identified with a BIR during the month of April. You can kind of think, you might be thinking about the data, which is what we want you to do. So we're looking at the data. You might have questions about one particular child as you go through and look at the data, which is what we want you to be doing, to be looking and thinking. So we also want to know, in what classroom are those children? So that other question about who are the children, we can find by looking in the monthly BIRs by classroom ID. So during the month of April, we can see that there are 10 classrooms who had completed BIRs during the month of April. Your eyes might be drawn to the same classroom that we have highlighted here. Again, important information to think about as we move forward with this data review. Who are the others involved with the incidents? And so before we look at this table, this is a really important place to highlight the multiple use of tables, graphs, and charts within the BIR. So as Myrna has probably described in a previous webinars around the use of the BIR and how we prepare graphs and tables and charts, there's something for everyone. So if you like bar graphs, there's bar graphs. If you like tables and charts, there's tables and charts. If you like pie charts, which we're going to see in a few slides, there's those as well. The data is the same. The way that they're visually represented is changed. And you, as you're prepping for meetings or as you're on the leadership team looking at data, you'll probably find a way that the data speaks to you and you understand the data that way. So here we see who are the others involved with the incidents. We see that the challenging behaviors most often occur with the teacher. During what routine does problem behavior occur? So we answered that question. You can see that during the month of April, those problem behaviors are occurring during transitions, primarily. There's that pie chart, if you're a pie chart person. What behaviors are most frequently reported? Primarily non-compliance during the month of April. Why are children engaging in challenging behavior? So we look at the possible motivation, and the majority is around avoiding tasks. So we're kind of summarizing kind of what's happening the most frequently. How are we responding to challenging behaviors? So in most incidents in the month of April, a verbal reminder was given in response to a challenging behavior. And then what were the administrative follow-up actions, if any? So for the month of April, most of the time there wasn't a program action, so it was not applicable, but you can see that there were some other program actions that you might know as you're going through the data review. So we've looked at all the data, and now we're going to kind of think about that data. So what do we know so far about this program? In the month of April, there was non-compliance It occurred with teachers, during transitions, and it might have been about avoiding tasks. So these are just kind of this, we're summarizing information, and we're also really thinking about information at this point before we make any program actions. So there might be additional things we want to know. Within the guide, there are think questions that are outlined for program teams to look at and to ask themselves. So there are, on page 17, that's actually where the program level think questions are. But they're questions that get at, do you need to look back at the data because you asked these questions? There's sometimes questions about what additional information might we need to know. So at this point in the data review process, as you're prepping, you would be kind of thinking, what additional information might we want to know before we go on to any kind of action planning? But continuing on our journey, we are going to look at classroom level look data. So we're in this same program, and we're going to outline and kind of go over these classroom level look steps. And so within the database decision-making guide, we tried to present information as clear as possible because of that question, I don't know where to go, I don't know where to start, where should I look for this? And it's outlined kind of step by step where you would start. So for example, in this classroom level look, when we first look at classroom data, we start by monthly BIRs by classroom ID. We find the classrooms that we want to look at, and then we switch to the classroom summary tabs. So we are going to continue on with our classroom level look for the same program in the month of April. So here we are at that incidents by classroom ID. And of those 10 classrooms, if we are a program leadership team, we might easily identify the classroom that we want to look at a little, kind of dig a little deeper. So we switch over to that classroom summary tab. So these are just sample graphs and charts so that you can see that kind of process. So we would look at our classroom summary and we would filter for classroom 1. So we see that classroom 1 is filtered for, and we are looking at this classroom. So classroom 1 has a grand total, so across the entire school year to date, 82 behavior incident reports that were completed. We could look to see how many children. We could be looking to see if there were many children contributing who are part of those 82 behavior incident reports. Or we could see what we have here is that it might be one child who might be experiencing or having more challenging behavior in the classroom. So when we look at this particular classroom, what we see is that of those 82 BIRs that were completed, 80 were completed for child 1. So at this point, this is just a demonstration of program data review. The leadership team might say, you know what, we're going to stop our classroom analysis for now. We really want to focus on looking a little deeper at this particular child. Let's focus our problem solving and this kind of process around child 1. So you would move to child analysis. If the data, if you looked at it and it had shown multiple children who had, who had BIRs that were completed, your action might be different. You might continue on and dig a little deeper into classroom data. But with this particular program, as we go through this data review, we are going to look at individual child data. So we have that same kind of process outlined for the individual child level look. There's step-by-step directions. So it tells you where to start and it tells you all the things that you can review to get a good summary for an individual child. So you start at the monthly BIRs by child ID tab. You look to see if there are children who have higher number of incidents. And once you have those children in mind, you then switch to the child summary tab. So let's do that together. So here we have our individual child level look. So we can see that we kind of had already looked at this at the program level, but we have 17 children who had a documented BIR during the month of April. but we can visually see that there's that child 1. That's that child 1 that we want to switch to. We want to go to that child summary tab to gain additional information. And as we do, we see things that might help us understand and kind of gain a little more information that will help us be better at decision making and making actions. So we're going to go over graphs and charts and tables that would be within the child summary. So here we see kind of when the first BIR was completed for child 1, and then we see that kind of increase in March and April. We see these kind of big spikes. So your leadership team might be thinking, let's look a little deeper and see what we can find out about this particular child. And so we go through, and this might be a time where the data coordinator has prepped this information. We may know that we're looking at child 1, and this information gets written down on that BIR summary worksheet to share with the leadership team. So let's go through this data and look at child 1, and what we can see, or we're kind of answering those big questions. We're looking at what is occurring. So we have physical aggression as is the challenging behavior that's occurring most frequently, followed by non-compliance, pretty close there. We can see that most of these challenging behaviors are occurring during transitions. Who are those others involved? So again, we're answering those big questions. The majority of challenging behaviors occur with the teacher in the classroom. What might the possible motivation be? So there are quite a few. The majority that are completed are avoiding task and maybe some gain attention. So we're looking to see any patterns around challenging behaviors. And then we can see what is the most frequent teacher response. So verbal reminder for this particular child is used frequently as the response in the classroom to challenging behavior. And we look at the administrative follow-up. We see that for the majority of times, there's not administrative follow-up, but there are information that we would want to pay attention to as the leadership team. The family has been contacted, and it's noted that there's been a behavioral consultation or a team that's been arranged. So just things that we're thinking about after we're looking at the data. And the team also may want to look at kind of when data is occurring. So for individual child data, we can look at data across time. And so this graph is one that helps us kind of interpret or kind of understand at what point during the day we can look to see if it matches up with routines. So is that 10 o'clock when those transitions are happening because routines are switching in the classroom? So again, just looking at additional data that can assist the team in making good action planning. So the team would look at all that data and they may summarize that data, but before they do, there might be questions. I'm hoping that some of these questions popped for you in your mind as we reviewed the data. Some of these questions are pulled directly from your leadership, that database decision-making guide in Think questions about individual child data. But these represent some questions that you might have posed in your mind around child 1 as we were going through that data review. So are there any changes at home or school that might affect why there was such a significant increase in BIRs that were completed in March and April? Are there any patterns in perceived motivation? So would we want to know more about avoiding task versus trying to gain adult attention? Are the teacher responses effective? So if we're looking at challenging behavior or physical aggression, does the teacher response a verbal reminder doesn't match? Is that maybe the best approach for this particular child as a response to a challenging behavior? Did that behavior consultation ever take place? The leadership team probably is going to want to know that information if they're thinking about supporting this child. And then is there additional information we need to understand about this child? Is the child a dual language learner? Is the child on an IEP? And if so, are these services being provided? Are they occurring what is the rate, what is progress, just additional information in order to make those really good program actions. So again, we've looked at the data and we're really thinking about child data. And so program actions are really going to be dependent on the summaries that you get from each program as you're reviewing the database decision-making process and you're looking at your BIR data. And our goal is that our final webinar, and Myrna, you can shake your head if this is true, is going to be kind of really digging deeper into this look, think, act process so that we can focus on and go through case studies and examples of what that look, think, act process is kind of in its entirety. All right, so we are just giving you lots of information, but one important thing we want to share with you today about data review is the use of precision statements. So I get really excited about data and I get really excited about precision statements because I think they're such a powerful way in which we can approach looking at data. So this is just kind of a skill that you can use on an ongoing basis to really understand the data around challenging behavior. And a precision statement is all about narrowing the focus. We want to gather the right data to create precision statements, and we want to make sure that those statements that were developed are aligned with other data summaries, that they make sense, and that they can really be used to make good action plans to really get those good outcomes for program, for classrooms, and for children. So I'm going to kind of outline what a precision statement is, and we're going to actually walk through one together so you can kind of see what this process may look like on an ongoing basis. And so we're really talking about being objective with data, and that it can be really easy to talk about challenging behavior in these kind of what I would call primary statements. So the children were not listening at all. They're just not good listeners in our program, or our kids are bouncing off the walls all the time. These kind of like general descriptions that I know I've heard as supporting as a program coach, as a classroom coach. These are just, when we're talking about challenging behavior, we might talk in these primary statements. But if you're collecting BIRs and you're entering data and you have the ability to really analyze that data, we can move to precision statements. So we can be objective, we can have data-based descriptors around challenging behavior. So we're going to start with an overall concern that needs addressed, and we're going to use that look, think, act process to drill down or narrow down that focus. Our goal is that we can develop data summaries that are matched to the guiding questions for problem solving. So here is a new data set. So we're using a different data set, different program to kind of illustrate this point. So again, you can use your kind of imagination that it's the month of October and the team is getting ready to review data. And the program looks at their data and they see that they have kind of a big jump in the number of BIRs that were completed during the month of October. They had 15 children who had a BIR completed, with an average of 6.9 BIRs per child. So we have the data. What the leadership team keeps hearing over and over is the children are always fighting. So coaches are hearing this, teachers are talking about it, like they're just always fighting with each other. So this is something that the leadership team wants to look at a little more. Everyone's saying the children are fighting. Well, what does that mean? It's a very general statement. Is it true? So we want to be able to look at, we know we had maybe an increase in behavior incident reports, but can we problem solve the children are always fighting? I'm not certain that the leadership team would have enough information to develop an action plan. What we want is to narrow that focus, to be able to get to a place where we can make action plans or think of things that we can put in place to have those good outcomes. So the first thing I would want to know is this true? Is physical aggression the most frequently kind of reported challenging behavior in our program. And we can answer that question with data. That's how fun is that, to be able to answer questions we have. So if we look at this program, we see that indeed physical aggression is the challenging behavior that is occurring most frequently. I would also want to know, are there classrooms that have more BIRs than others? Are we talking about a few children? Are we talking about a lot of children? We can also answer those questions with data. So we can answer the big questions, but we can think about it around one challenge. Look at this around physical aggression. So here we have the total number of incidents by classroom ID. So remember, my question was, is it all the classrooms? We can see we do have 8 classrooms that have behavior incident reports completed, but 2 classrooms kind of stick out in my mind. So we kind of tuck that in our mind. We hold on to it as we move forward. And we also have a way that we can quickly find out additional information. So this is my little detour to talk about, if you're using the Excel spreadsheet and you haven't used the distribution by classroom class ID tab, this is a great place to get additional information when you need to narrow down the focus. So I'll say that again, if you're taking notes and following along, it's the distribution by class ID tab. This tab has a bunch of pivot charts that, when filtered, can really narrow down or provide us focused information. So in this case, we can look at program data and we can filter for physical aggression. And we can see when we do that, it tells us these are the classrooms that had challenging behavior related to physical aggression. And we can kind of see the total number of incidents by classroom. So it's a really easy way to focus, and we might kind of know where we want to spend or get additional information. We looked at the data, now we want to know, we're thinking about the data, we want to know a little more. There's additional information in the decision-making guide on page 20 about the use of that distribution by classroom ID. All right, so backing up, kind of going back away from the detour, we're gonna look at physical aggression, and we're filtering. So we can look at who are the children that are experiencing, who've experienced physical aggression in the classroom. So there are 13 children, so we have a range of children. We might not have one child, we have kind of many children who have more than kind of 5 incidents around physical aggression. So again, we're just looking at this information and trying to get a summary statement. So on our problem behavior tab, we have the ability to filter for a specific behavior and get all this focus data. So we're within the problem behavior tab. We've filtered for physical aggression. And if you follow along, we're going to be able to start answering those big questions that we want to have information and we want to know. So physical aggression is happening in centers, indoor play. It's occurring, so who is challenging behavior occurring with? It's occurring with peers. Why might it be occurring? So what's that possible motivation for physical aggression? The majority is around obtaining desired items. And the most frequently used response to physical aggression in the classroom is a verbal reminder, followed closely by that reteaching, practicing expected behaviors. And then we get information around administrative follow-up. So if we looking for physical aggression, we see that about 43 of the incidents, if they're not applicable, there's not a program administrative follow-up. But I definitely would want to review always our administrative follow-up. If I'm a data coordinator, I'm a leadership team member, there's information here, it's starred because we want you to look at it. There are things that are really important for the team to consider. So a child had an incident related to physical aggression, and the administrative action was, we had one around sent home for 1 or more days, sent home for remainder of day, dismissal from program. really critical information that the leadership team would want to follow up on, would want to get additional information about some of those program actions. So then we can summarize the data. So as we were going through, we can see those are the big questions we just walked through together. And we can kind of, as you're doing this, when you do precision statements, you're taking notes. That's why that summary worksheet is so helpful, because what you're putting together is a precision statement. So here's the precision statement that we just completed or walked through together around physical aggression. So within the program, BIRs are most commonly identified for physical aggression in indoor play with peers to obtain desired items. The most common response is verbal reminders with no administrative follow-up. But we have to remember that we looked at additional data too. And we also saw that this was not true for all classrooms. So part of developing precision statements is making sure they're true, making sure they're accurate. And so this is an accurate precision statement, but it doesn't apply to all classrooms within the program. It really applies to two particular classrooms. So classrooms 11 and 12, as we went through the data, those are the classrooms that had a higher number of incidents for physical aggression. So if you're a program leadership team and you have two statements, you have the children are always fighting, or you have information about what the challenging behavior is, where it occurs, who it occurs with, kind of the why, that information, I would much rather spend time problem solving this very precise, focused precision statement. So this statement can be used to develop action plans. And you might be thinking in your head, I can think of things right now we might think about. So what are coaching supports? Again, we look at data, we think about data. What kind of coaching is occurring in the classroom? What social skills are being taught? So if we see something around obtaining desired items, how are social skills being used in the classroom? What instruction are we providing around peer-to-peer support? What are our responses, maybe beyond verbal reminders that we can use in the classroom? So again, we're thinking about actions that are directly linked to the data. That's powerful. And as Myrna described, and as she started us out on the webinar, the BIR is a really powerful tool. And that precision statement is just one way that we can summarize data that really helps us better understand what's happening around challenging behavior and how we can make program actions.
How exciting. I'm sure so many of you are like, I can't wait to go back and look at my data using the database decision-making guide. At least I hope so. But we've reviewed really looking at your data and creating the precision statements. I really like those too. And, you know, like Megan says, you can really appreciate how powerful data can be and how it can really help inform, you know, what those next steps are going to be. Next slide. But the BIR is really only a piece of that whole puzzle, right? So it's one component of pyramid model data collection. There's multiple data tools to assess implementation at the program and classroom level. You've got the TPOT, the tippy toes, the benchmarks of qualities, you've got coaching logs. So your program might also be using child outcome measures as well. And the BIR is really just one piece. So today we really just looked at what it might look like with the BIR, but you always have to remember, and it's really important for you to think about the data from all of these other sources when you're action planning. So as Megan mentioned a little earlier, what coaching is occurring in the classroom. So if you're looking at your BIR and you have coaching log data, you can go back and you can reference that to see, is the classroom that I'm looking at, are the teachers in that classroom, have they been coached? So that's kind of what we mean when we say that it's just one component of all of the data that you are probably collecting in your program. And so lessons learned, some of the lessons that we've learned is that programs that use the BIR system effectively, they're efficient in their ability to support children and teachers. They review data over time to determine capacity and their ability to respond to challenging behavior. At the same time, it's important they're entering data consistently and they are reviewing that monthly. They have a lens on response to behavior. So how are our teachers responding? And they understand, again, going back to that point, that the BIRS is really one of the many components of the pyramid model implementation, and it is not the answer. It's not the one thing. It's really cool, but not the one thing. So one thing that I just want to mention here is how to print graphs from the BIRS spreadsheet. So I do have a YouTube video that I put up, and to get to it, you'll go to challengingbehavior.org. So that's the NCPMI website. At the very top, there is a YouTube little icon. You'll click on that. And then once you click on that, it'll take you to our YouTube page. Yeah, and then once you're on our YouTube page, you'll see playlists. You'll click on that. And then one of the playlists is called Data Tools. And so that will have the video on how to print tables, charts, and entire tabs if you want to. And then there's also videos on creating IDs, and then all of the data tools, data entry. All right, and so the next webinar, as we said, this is part of the webinar series. So the next webinar, we'll discuss equity alerts and profiles. We'll go through disproportionality. We'll mention coaching. We'll talk about coaching resources. So that one is really going to be focused on those equity alerts that are part of the BIR system. It will be in January of 2021. We don't have a date quite yet. But in December, we will announce registration. So we hope that you'll join us there as well. So we do have a few minutes for questions. I did want to mention the database decision-making guide that we've referenced throughout. You would have downloaded it when you downloaded that entire BIR package off of our website. It was part of that. If you don't remember getting it, or you don't have it any longer, you can email me and I can provide it for you, or you can go back to that link and you can download the new version of the BIR, which was released in August. That also has some updates to the database decision-making guide.
I don't see any other questions, Myrna. It looks like you responded to some of the questions, and I apologize. I'm realizing now that someone let us know the page numbers are cut off the screen, and could I fix the view? But I didn't see that until just now, so I do apologize that those page numbers, which we tried to be so helpful, were not available for everyone's view. But they should be able to access those page numbers that correspond with the content in the PDF file that has the slides in it. So I'm hoping that you'll be able to find them there. But that's good feedback for future trainings and webinars with that format. So thank you.
I'd like to thank both of our panelists so much for their wonderful insights and for this presentation. And your feedback is very important to the work we do. Please remember to provide your feedback on this webinar with our post-webinar survey by typing the web address shown on this slide into your internet browser. Your certificate of attendance will appear once you submit the survey. We invite you to visit our website, challengingbehavior.org, to sign up for our upcoming webinars, access recordings, download pyramid model resources, and more. And thank you to our funder for making this webinar possible. This concludes our webinar. Thank you all and have a great rest of your day.